Hi, my name is Alice. I use she, her pronouns, and best of luck for everyone.
Hi, I'm Andrew. I use him pronouns. Good luck to both teams.
Hi, I'm Jason. I prefer if you refer to the panel as a whole. Good luck.
Thank you. Just general housekeeping rules. Don't misgender anyone. Always to the speakers, advisable to just flag it out the preferences for POIs as well as for gender pronouns. Having said that, calling this house to order and call upon the Prime Minister to open the case for their side. Floor is yours whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Please confirm that I'm audible.
Yep, you're
Chair?
audible loud and clear.
Lovely. So I prefer my POIs verbally. My preferred gender pronouns are she, her, and I will flick for POIs. So please do not badger me unless I flick for POIs. Give me a minute. Let me set my timer. Okay, so I will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, we think that within this debate, the very crucial thing that we ought to understand is which team best benefits both the actors and protects the basic sovereignty of both the actors entirely, right? A couple of things, right? First of all, in terms of characterization, what does unification look like? This looks like trying to join Northern Korea and Southern Korea and understand this two countries have already been separated. It looks like these two countries, which already have a distinct, have difference in their cultures due to the long separation that they have gone through. It also looks like trying to unify two countries that have different governance. It looks like trying to join a democratic country and a dictator-led country. It also looks like trying to join two countries that have an equal economic balance entirely, right? Apart from that, what do we think is very important within this debate, and what does the status quo look like, and what does the status quo look like that then prevents the unification to be very much possible, right? First of all, we tell you about how North Korea is entirely crumbling as an economy. That is to say, if we want to join these two countries, we're going to give South Korea a burden that we really can't handle, but then I'll explain that later. Secondly, we think that we also need you to understand that it looks like tension has already risen between these two countries. These two countries don't align. These two countries perceive each other as not the true Koreans. We think that's also a thing that you ought to understand. The status quo also looks like North Korea has a dictative government. So understand, a dictator would definitely not want to step into power. However, unification means joining these two governments, which might not be feasible, right? So what do we think are the grounds on which this debate is won on? We think that it's won on a principle ground. We also think that it is won on the basic outcome, which country best benefits the actors and has the best outcome entirely, right? A couple of substantives. First of all, we think that we ought to understand the principle of sovereignty, right? What does sovereignty looks like within this debate? First of all, we think this is the ability of a country to stand without threat, i.e. peace. That is to say, the ability of Southern Korea, the ability of Northern Korea without any threat, to be able to fulfill its mandates as a country and to provide peace. Secondly, we think that this looks like the ability of a country to keep up with its principles, right? That is to say, we see that Southern Korea already in the status quo advocates for humanitarian, it advocates for democratic government. We think that at a point in time we are going to try and join these two countries. It will not be feasible. Why so? Because South Korea will be perceived as a liar entirely, because it advocates for humanity, it advocates for democracy, but in a world where we join this two, this will not be granted, and it will be going against its principles. So how is this harmed, right? First of all, we think that between these two countries, in a world where we provide unification, conflicts are likely to rise, right? Two things why this is true. First of all, we think that Northern Korea is trying as much as it can and very much values its sovereignty, right? So at a point in time where you join this two, that sovereignty won't exist. That is to say, it's going to go under Southern Korea, and we all know Southern Korea has a stable economy and is basically richer and sustainable as compared to Northern Korea. So this will greatly threaten its sovereignty, and this is something that we don't advocate for, right? Secondly, we think South Korea will not only be perceived as a liar, but will also be perceived as a threat to Northern Korea entirely, which in this case we talked about the sovereignty, right? We think that Speaker, I said of flick for POIs. We think that it harms the mandate of South Korea, which is safety. That is to say, South Korea's mandate to its people is to provide safety whatsoever and to provide a sustainable economy and a safe environment. But at a point in time where it exists in a world where we advocate for unification, what is going to happen is this peace that we want won't exist. It also looks like Southern Korea losing its it also looks like Southern Korea losing its allies such as United States, who are totally against the idea of Northern Korea entirely, right? Secondly, we think that Northern Korea as a whole will strain Southern Korea entirely, and this is something that we can't handle. We think that at a point in time where Southern Korea advocates for humanity, at a point in time where we want to create a very safe environment as a government within Southern Korea, we can't provide this if we have unification. Why? Because the Britain will look like Southern Korea trying to incorporate Northern Korea's crippled economy. That is to say, this will be strained as they will be trying to share about resources. So in that essence, it won't be able to have a sustainable economy entirely. Secondly, we think that the culture in itself is already different because of the way they were split. But the very most crucial thing here we need you to understand is the system of governance in itself and the difference that exists. We think that you can't join a dictator and a government. We think that it's very likely that a dictator would not want to step down. So at a point in time where you want to join those two governments, it won't be feasible, where others advocate for the voice of the people, the voice of the general public, and we think that it will not exist and it will not be feasible entirely, right? I already told you about the economic burdens that we have on South Korea, right? So before I move on to the impacts, I'll move on to a couple of preemptive rebuttals, right? So first of all, we think that war is unlikely to happen in a world where we keep these two countries separated. Why? 30 things, yeah. First of all, South Korea is heavily armed and rich. That is to say, it doesn't only have money, it doesn't only have a sustainable economy, it also has a sustainable army in and itself, and a sustainable political structure. That is to say, it also has United States, which is superpower, as an ally. That is to say, at a point in time where it goes to war with Northern Korea, it will still win. And we think that Northern Korea is smart enough not to risk this when it knows that it will lose. Secondly, we think that this is true because Northern Korea understands its mandates to its people. Let's say its mandates look like granting a safety for its people, and it will not risk a war where it might potentially lose. Thirdly, we think that Northern Korea also understands the very fact that at a point in time where it does go to war with Southern Korea, it will not be able to sustain itself because its allies, i.e. Japan, i.e. Russia, are not strong enough to support it, right? Moving on, what else do we think is very important? And moving on to the third preemptive rebuttal, right? Why we think about like the culture in itself cannot interlink, cannot allow them to have a joint and unified state, right? So understand, originally when these two countries were separated, which was years and ages ago, it resulted to them understanding and being able to depend on themselves, right? Learning the idea of self-reliance as a country. So at a point in time when we join this, we think it won't be feasible because one, they already understand how to stand alone as a country. Two, it will cripple Southern Korea, and this is something that we can't afford. We think that it is very important not to strain Southern Korea, to grant security of its people, and to also not give it unnecessary economic strains. And a couple of things, even if in a world where we think, Northern Korea has the largest nuclear bomb, in a world that they're still separated with this tension, it might release the nuclear. We think this is highly unlikely. Why? Because first of all, Northern Korea is in very much close proximity to Southern Korea entirely, right? So that is to say, at a point in time where they release a nuclear bomb, which has massive impact and widespread impact entirely, might threaten the safety of itself and its people. So this will guarantee that it does not do something as stupid as releasing a nuclear bomb to its people. So we think on that level, we understand that North Korea is a totalitarian state and it will not opt for war that might be lost. And with that, I've never been prouder to propose.
I thank the speaker for their fine remarks, calling upon the first speaker from side opposition.
Am I audible for you?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
So if I'm audible, I'll be starting the speech in 5, 4,
So please tell me how Kim Jong-un will say yes to a democracy as a dictator.
Panel, it is not our burden to prove that it will happen now. It may not happen. It is our burden in this debate is to prove why the process of trying to unify is good or bad, but it may happen in like 50 years. I don't know. That's a big time frame. We believe that this unification is so that this is good on two levels. Firstly, ideologically is talking about how the unification is great for the peninsula, how the families torn apart by the DMZ and can be united by creating a one big Korean state. It is also means bringing up historical ties and bonds across the Korean border. But secondly, it is telling people that they will gain practically on the unification in South Korea because of North Korea's resources, because of the connectivity that could be possible with like China and Russia via land, meaning cheaper transport costs and things like that. We believe that it is done by showing the willingness to talk to the North, having the Ministry of Unification that works on the plans to unify those two countries, having programs like the ones that helps families to reunite. We believe that it is like one of the founding myths of South Korea. From the start, after the Korean War, South Korea was based on a promise that it will happen. Notice that this narrative was spread in South Korea very visibly through schools, through the media, through like official government communication, and it has been portrayed as the patriotic duty. It has been, basically yes. So how that we believe that looks like on SideGov? We believe that the change, that it is the change in status quo on what actually happened. So on their side of the house, you literally say that it's no longer possible, that the Kim regime is there to stay, that it's not possible in the future, and the whole promise on like the Korean dream of why it was founded will not work. Moving on to our case. Why we believe that on our side of the house it would cause dissonance within the people and within Korea. Firstly, we believe it's a huge change from what people actually have have heard. As I have told you, this is a departure from the status quo that has not only been one of the few coherent narratives pushed in the politics for the last 50 years in Korea, but has been the founding myth explaining why the state is there in the first place. This is a leap so big that it is bound to be seen as an extremely bold by breaking up any established precedent, which we believe that leads to a huge shock, especially that is happening suddenly at the point in time that is not very specific. But secondly, we believe that this action is especially infuriating to the people because it causes a lot of dissonance with what the people heard from the government that has been telling them that they will get the benefits from the unification. For the last 50 years, the government has been trying to convince them to that policy, telling them how they will get benefits economically, demographically, and personally. We believe that they were taught that it is actually good and that suddenly flipping this narrative makes people on the comparative field that they are losing all of those benefits of the unification that they learned so much about, and that all of their struggles that were justified by it go to waste. Taking away things people were taught to perceive as super good awakes extremely strong emotions and makes people extremely surprised. But thirdly, we believe that it plays against the whole ideological propaganda of Korea. This was the justification on how the state operated for many years. It was taught as the national duty for the citizen, and it was taught that it is something of a moral duty and something that is morally good for its citizens. Notice that many citizens participated in the Korean army because of the forced draft in Korea, and they heard that they are fighting and serving in order to justify this goal, in order to build on the promise of one Korea. We believe that this mechanism is even stronger with the historical context of the Korean War, because there are many people who still remember it, who suffered for it, who have their families torn apart and who are impacted by it. Even if they did not live through the Korean War, maybe their parents or their grandparents did, which have gave them and which like told them about how Korea used to be one, how they are hurt by the regime in the north that is taking their lands, and why taking away this possibility at one go is simply so bad on this huge story that has been told to the people. We believe that on the comparative, you get a much more stable narrative because you stick to all of those things that you have actually told the people for so many years. They hear that the government is coherent in what it does and doesn't change all of those benefits that it promised the people in one go. So impacts from that. This means that the citizens who are probably heavily focused on this personal message have like a much clearer view from the government. This means that they do not fear that, oh, the government may do something bad and basically will not turn think that the government is much more predictable, that it won't turn around on the promises it gave them. We believe it gives people trust and the willingness to cooperate within the government.
I thank the speaker for their final remarks, calling upon the second speaker from side proposition.
Okay, just to check, am I audible?
You're audible loud and clear.
All right, so I will be starting in 3, 2, 1. Panel, quite frankly, opposition believes in telling citizens a lie. They lie to people and say, look, you guys are going to unify, you're going to be one big family. Firstly, if that will not happen, and we proved that that is unlikely to happen, we think it's unfair to burden people with so much lies. Secondly, if they claim that there are things such as unification taxes that exist, we think those taxes could be going to much more fruitful things such as investing in the economy of South Korea. This is extremely important, panel, because if their whole case is premised on the idea that you need to keep narratives consistent, we don't keep narratives consistent if they are literally a lie. They had to engage with that. That's why I'm super proud. 2 things will get in my speech. Firstly, some responsive work, and then I'm going to tell you an argument on why there's a certain level of polarization that's going to exist. In terms of responses then, what do they tell us? I think the main crux of the issue is the idea that the narrative that this narrative has been pushed for so long, and therefore government should make sure that they keep to it in the first place. The first thing here and the first response we give you is that people are not stupid. What this means is that people understand that, look, this has been pushed for 50 long years. What this means is that it's quite unlikely that this unification will exist at all. Secondly, the people in South Korea live in a democracy, meaning they have the ability to watch TV, they have the ability to watch YouTube. This means that they know that Kim Jong-un literally said that this unification is something that is unlikely to happen as is. Thirdly, we think that these people might not even want to see their family. This is generally because of the reason that when the Korean War happened, we know that war has things such as propaganda. What this means is that both sides of the war say, he is harmful, don't buy into him. This person is harmful, they don't care about you. What this means is that there's a certain level of hate that exists within these families. What this means is that even if you unite them, it is quite unlikely that they're going to get that unity that they assume. The third strategic flaw with their case is that they assume that a functional democracy will be had. What they don't understand here is that Kim Jong-un is not like the people living in Germany who buy into communism. Kim Jong-un is a hardcore dictator who believes in the idea of dictatorship in the first place. They have to prove to us why this pursuit is likely to bring good outcomes, but secondly, why Kim Jong-un is likely to listen in the first place. Another thing that is important to note is that opposition doesn't engage with our matter at all. And this is where my way up and comparative comes in. What does Notando tell you in her speech? The first thing she tells you is the idea that you're likely to raise tensions when South Korea is busy probing into something that North Korea doesn't want to do entirely. It's important to understand that when a bear says that you shouldn't probe into it, you shouldn't probe into it at all. Secondly, and most crucially, is the idea that North Korea is likely to become a financial burden to South Korea in the first place. The only response we get to this is, we think South Korea is one of the richest countries, they generally don't mind. It's clear to us that opposition doesn't understand what economics generally look like. When you bring in other people, those people need employment, they need much more welfare, you need to be able to sustain them. If your economy is not that huge, you will not be able to sustain them alongside the citizens living within that country in the first place. This is an extremely important panel, and note how it weighs up against the idea of narratives and people not trusting the government anymore because of these narratives. We think that people trust governments that give them their money. They trust governments that give them welfare. When you bring in some other people here who take your money, you're firstly unlikely going to trust the people that come from North Korea. You think they're taking your money. Secondly, you are unlikely to trust the government at all. The second thing as she tells you is the idea that there's different cultures that exist. What you have to understand, panel, is that I am not the same person I was 50 years ago. What this means is that both sides of Korea have evolved, right? And in their evolution, they have grown distinctly different, even if it's similar. This basically means that if these people are so distant from each other, it means that they're unlikely to have cultures that are the same. But note, if these people have lived apart for so many years, then there's a narrative called the Korean way of life and how Koreans are supposed to generally act. These two things are going to clash as a result. But also then, the other thing that you have to note is that we tell you here how, firstly, we win on a principle level, but secondly, we're going to be able to show you why we win on outcomes as is. Let me get into my argument here when I tell you why polarization is much likely to exist. Firstly, then, we have to look at three structural reasons why. The first is that cultures have already evaporated the point at which the Korean War actually existed due to propaganda and things like that. The second is that you have to note the perception between these individuals and how they relate with each other. It's quite likely that people in North Korea don't like the individuals in South Korea, and the two things exist in that regard. Thirdly, then, as we've told you, we think you feed into the harmful narrative of what a true Korean actually looks like. A couple of impacts to this. Firstly, it means that even if families unite, they are unlikely to have the same beliefs because it was literally 5 years ago. Secondly, you are likely to cause divisions between the population. What this means is that you're going to still have North Korea, quote unquote, existing in one realm and South Korea, quote unquote, existing in the other realm. Why is this necessarily harmful? We think it harms the idea behind unification as is. We think what opposition tries to tell you is that unification will be a good thing and these people will be a happy family. If we show you that polarization will exist, it means that the happy family narrative is something that will not exist on their side of the world. But thirdly, and most crucially, we think that you allow like harmful politicians to be able to arise when you have a divided nation. This looks like propaganda being spread as a result. A couple of impacts here, and we'll show you why we are way above opposition even in the second speech. First, we tell you that families are unlikely to unite simply because of these differences. But secondly, it's important that we look beyond these families as is. You're going to have a population that buys into one thing while the other buys into the other. Note the ways in which these countries were separated in the first place. It was because of a war panel. It wasn't because of something that was meant for fun. But also, and most crucially, we think that individuals are going to opt out of government if government doesn't ensure that these individuals live in a space that is equitable and in a space that allows for their mental well-being. But thirdly, and most crucially, panel, and I want you to imagine this. Imagine you are a person that fled from North Korea. And because of the fear that Kim Jong-un enacts within his people, it means that your family hates you for taking that bold step. What this means is that when they are in your presence, you are generally going to be troubled as a person. But secondly, the very president who troubled you when you lived in North Korea is now somehow a prime minister in cabinet. We think these individuals who are so troubled will not be able to coexist here and will have bad mental well-beings as a result. Panel, quite frankly, what you have to understand is that unification is not all glitz and glam, and it's not about games. Quite frankly, we wouldn't want to associate with opposition. We wouldn't want to unite with them because we are winners, and winners don't unite with losers. Say no to unification. Super proud.
I thank the speaker for their fine remarks, calling upon the second speaker from side opposition.
Am I audible?
Yep, you're audible and visible.
Okay, that's great. I'm gonna try to make myself not stretched. Okay, I won't be able to, I don't think so. Okay. So I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Dear panel, it is foolish to assume that no one is watching when the whole world is. The whole world is divided into political blocs that have been the foundation of South Korean prosperity panel from their help. We should stay in line with our and our allies' ideals of democracy. In this speech, you will hear an argument about the international response to our actions and why we cannot mess with our diplomacy like side government does. But before that, a couple key points of clarifications. First of all, let's finally finish the topic of similarities of both nations in this debate. Panel, Korean society is a very unified one. It is first and foremost a very old society of a lot of simply old and elderly people. Thus, a lot of people simply remember the times of unity. A lot of people remember the Korean War, and a lot of families still remain divided to this day. Both nations also have the same history, a lot of the same historical figures. They speak a very similar language and live in a similar culture. Those nations can unify, and we believe that it is possible in a very long time frame. That does not have to happen anyway for us to win this round. Because panel, we see that side government for some reason cannot see beyond the life and the rule of Kim Jong-un. Panel, we believe that Kim Jong-un might literally die tomorrow and the whole situation might change. But he may also lose power in 20 years and this debate will still be valid. We believe our impacts stand regardless of whether reunification happens or not. But we have to remember that foreign policy is something that is played long term. And so the results may not come in a decade, but then they may come in a century. And we still believe that those goings are simply principally valid. Yeah, I'll take a POI.
So, please tell us the benefits that are going to come with unification. Because in order for a case to hold value, you have to tell us that the outcome of that is something you value as a side and is something that's going to bring benefits.
Sure, I will tell you that in a moment, but I also believe that simply fighting for the free will of your own people, of your own nation, is a principal reason why a government should care for those people and actually fight for them. But before that, a couple of key points of rebuttal to their cases. First of all, on their case of principle. Panel, this debate is a first-person motion. We don't see why Korea or the United States would have a reason to believe in the principle of sovereignty of North Korea. And secondly, we believe that this principle of sovereignty is not fulfilled in the status quo anyway, because the principle of sovereignty does not apply to a government head like Kim Jong-un. It applies to the nation of North Korean people, which today have no say on what their government does. Thus, we believe that this principle is not fulfilled on their side anyway, and our goings can actually only make it more likely for this principle to be fulfilled in the future by giving those people a say in what country they want to actually live in and how this country functions. Secondly, on unification as a burden, responding to the POI as well. Panel, as I told you before, we do not have to prove that unification will happen for our cases to stand. However, we still believe that unification is a good thing and that our sides has a better chance of it happening. And panel, we believe that first of all, North Korea is not a burden in itself because North Korea is an extremely rich region with a lot of mineral resources, with a lot of good geography, and with a lot of, for example, water access. However, we also believe that simply people living there deserve the care of their government. And so when reunification happens, we believe that it is not a waste of resources. It's simply fulfilling the principal goals of the state. However, also note that there is a lot of allies that have an interest in actually helping us rebuild North Korea. Why? Because there is a lot of political pressure within democracies like the United States to spread democracy over the world and to not allow, for example, North Korea to break away again and have the same thing happen over and over again. Thus, stability is also a goal that likely will mean there will be funds and it will be possible to actually reach those things. Not now. And lastly, on the case of political chaos, panel, we believe that political chaos simply happens when you have a very radical and controversial switch of your national policy, not really even foreign policy, like national policy, what you do with your nation as a group of people. Quick flip of that panel, we believe that it's much more likely that political chaos will happen when you do such a switch on site government. But moving to some pieces of rebuilding, we believe that residents of South Korea are aware of the likelihood of reunification. Like, they live in a democratic society that has free access to information, and they do not support those goings only because they believe that reunification will happen. They support those things because they believe it is the right thing to do by their government. And secondly, they are also able to simply notice the long-term benefits of this policy that even may happen past their own life when reunification becomes more likely, for example, in like 50 years with gradual democratization of the northern state. South Korean citizens are, first of all, well-educated, and they secondly are strongly patriotic. So they can look into the future as well as they can look beyond their personal interests, like tax burdens, for example, to support the policy, like the policy of reunification, not now. And note that this means that only on our side can we actually have support of society for this policy of the government. And only on our side can those policies actually make sense, as only when they are supported by the nation and thus stable, they are likely to actually be continued by new governments that will take over power in every single new election. We also simply achieve more trust in the government overall and add this as an impact to our first case from first crop. Yeah, I'll take a POI quickly.
So you talk about gradual democratization. Please talk about how that will happen, like even if Kim Jong-un dies, because he leaves a long legacy of dictatorship.
Okay, but like people who come after him may, for example, simply have better ideas for the state. We do not have to prove that, panel. I hope you know that by this point. Moving on to my constructive argument. Panel, letting go of the claiming of the North is simply a message that will provoke unfavorable reactions from the rest of the world and our support bloc. Firstly, again, note how this is a very specific time for those things to happen. We saw by the end of 2023, the Kim Jong-un regime not only resigned from this one Korea policy, but also did other dramatic things. For example, in January now, we saw, for example, an event of over like 200 missiles that were fired on an island of South Korea that had people on it. We had hundreds of residents have to be evacuated from their homes. North Korea literally stated that they will probably do such things in the future as well. Now, such an attack would probably be treated as a declaration of war in many other places in the world. And again, a week ago, North Korea again fired several cruise missiles into the sea, missiles that are capable of actually carrying nuclear warheads that North Korea does have. And we believe that in this context, like, you should principally not follow the doings of someone that actually attacks you and that someone that actually does wrong things to your nation. Accepting the sovereignty of North Korea is one of the biggest forms that the government can actually accept something diplomatically. Like, it's officially switching from saying that the regime is legal to now saying that it's an actual government that deserves to exist and that deserves recognition, no more POIs. Which simply goes against any logic that the regime any logic to the citizens whenever the regime tries to again attack South Korea. And so we believe that the government's policy, on-site government, will only appease the Kim regime even more and make it even stronger in the future. Not only because we simply give them a better status, but also because we simply follow their diplomatic steps as a secondary. Note how they did it first. By following their own steps, we show that they do have an influence over policy, and they should not have an influence over policy in our minds. And so this is an extremely bad impact. Note how we consider this a very bad thing. Because first of all, the Kim regime gets appeased and becomes more likely to actually push those boundaries even further, but also like our allies like the United States will see that we are willingly letting go of this potential claim, of this potential influence, and of something that is a democratic value that is extremely important to the society of the United States, of the society of South Korea itself, or like the society of Japan. All of those allies will likely enact some sort of pressure on us to go back to that policy, meaning that we again will have to destabilize our own foreign policy, something that is extremely dangerous whenever there is a threat of war on the northern border. Panel, we believe in stability, we believe in our alliances, and we believe in democracy. Thanks.
I thank the speaker for their fine remarks, calling upon the third speaker from side proposition.
Okay, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible loud and clear.
Okay. I'll take all my POIs in the chat box, please. And thank you. Okay, I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Now, firstly, panel, you know that a side has lost when they continue to run the same thing, when they continue to rebut the strategy on our side. Panel, we need to understand, as the first speaker from side proposition came up and told you, this is an actor's motion. And an actor's motion requires us to understand that what is in the best interest of the two actors. Panel, we believe that opposition then loses this debate in their framing when they fail to tell us what is the best interest of North Korea or the best interest of South Korea, and how the reunification then comes in and meets the best interest. What does Notanda tell you in her first speech? She tells you the best interest of South Korea, such as humanitarian aid, such as peace, and such as denuclearization, which is extended by Dimple. But panel, side opposition then doesn't come up here and prove to us that reunification is going to help with the best interest of side proposition, which we stated in our first speech. However, even if they had not done that, side proposition still had the burden to tell us that on their side, as it is an actor's motion, they are going to bring forth the best interest of both countries by bringing together these countries by reunification. And panel, when they fail to do that in their framing and their characterization, when they fail to understand that this is an actor's motion, they lose that on the first ground. But panel will take them at their best. Now, panel, I'd then like to tell you that the Korean War ended in 1953, and that is 71 years ago from today, panel, and from this year. Panel would then like to tell you that from 71 years ago up to now, panel, there's been a lot of indoctrination. So when side opposition comes up here and tells us that South Koreans and North Koreans are the same people and they have the same cultures and the same languages, panel, we feel like, okay, even though that is true, yes, they speak the same culture, yes, they have the same languages, but panel, we feel like North Koreans have been indoctrinated in a different way besides from South Koreans. Why is that important, panel? Panel, we tell you that indoctrination outweighs the same culture or the same language, because indoctrination is the way people do things and the way people think. So panel, even if they might have the same language or the same culture, because North Koreans have been indoctrinated differently from South Koreans, they will never meet on a common ground. So panel, even let's say reunification works and let's say these people are not living in the same country, we feel like what they're vying for on their side, where they have united Korea, is simply unrealistic, panel, because even if they become a united Korea, there will always be segregation in that country because of different ideologies and because of different indoctrination. So when they come up here and tell us that there'll be similar culture and same languages, which helps with reunification, that point then becomes redundant. The second thing which they then come up and tell us is that the government has got the obligation to push for reunification because the government has promised this to people for a long time. Well, panel, we tell you, as Dimpo tells you, that the people of South Korea are not blind. They have seen what North Korea has done to citizens. We believe that the people of South Korea have realized that for the past 71 years, reunification has become something which is unrealistic, panel. Panel, we feel like when Kim Jong-un, as Dimpo said, tells the people of South Korea that he's no longer going to pursue reunification, we feel like that is a burden enough for the South Koreans to understand that is something which is no longer going to happen. Panel, we feel like the people of South Korea, even in ourselves to no longer, I will accept POIs in the chat box, please. Panel, we feel like the people of South Korea, because they've seen what's happening in North Korea, we feel like they don't even want to join North Korea anymore. And as Dimple tells you that these people are most likely going to even be rejected by their family because of, firstly, the different ideologies, because the war happened for a very long period of time. Now, panel, side opposition then comes up here and tells you that the connectivity of North Korea, and they tell us about this alliance which they have with North Korea. Panel, we tell you that on first glance, there's no alliance with North Korea. Panel, just recently, North Korea was sending in spy drones into South Korea to spy on South Korea, meaning that there's no alliance. North Korea is not going to agree with South Korea, meaning that South Korea does not owe North Korea any alliance. Panel, we then come up to you that when opposition tells us about strong connectivity, we feel like that is a lie. Panel, it is a lie because South Korea, we feel like, has got more investors such as the Western community, which has got more money, which is bringing in more things than whatever North Korea will offer on their side. So when it comes on connectivity, they lose on that ground. Panel, the next thing which they come up and tell us is that when Kim Jong-un died, they'll have a world where there'll be democracy and they'll have a world where there'll be a solid government. Panel, we then come up and tell you that even in the case that Kim Jong-un dies, Dimple still tell you that because of the dictatorship and because of the foundation that Kim Jong-un has laid of dictatorship, there's still going to be a dictatorship mindset and a dictatorship mentality, which is going to not go out of North Korea because Kim Jong-un and his family, it's a dictatorship family, they've cemented dictatorship for a long period of time. So even if Kim Jong-un was to die, the next person who's going to come into power is still going to push that dictatorship mindset because he's been indoctrinated with dictatorship, meaning that in the future, there's still going to be dictatorship leaders and totalitarian dictatorships, meaning that when they tell you that in the future, there's going to be this whole idea of a fair government, of a democratic government, that is a lie. Panel. Now, panel, they then come up here and tell you about the international reaction, where they tell us that America will understand, or they tell us that other countries will understand this. Panel, we then come up here and tell you that, panel, North Korea is seen as a bad light already in the international community. The moment we rejoin with North Korea, panel, we feel like we are then going to rejoin however they're seen in the world. Panel, we feel like how North Korea is seen outweighs how South Korea is seen. So the moment we then reunify with North Korea, whatever North Korea is carrying is going to therefore feed onto us. Panel, that means that the bad light which North Korea is in with the international community will immediately affect what South Korea is in. Now, panel, I'm going to move on to the clashes in this debate. Now, the first clash in this debate, panel, was which side best brings the best interest of both countries. Panel, from side opposition, we get this idea of connectivity of North Korea, and we get this idea that when the government keeps promises, they make people happy and they make people more excited and they have faith or whatever they said on their side. Well, panel, we then come up and tell you that on the first level of connectivity, we prove to you that South Korea is already a country which has its own allies, a country which has its own money. They don't need what North Korea is offering. Panel, but panel, even if we needed what North Korea was offering, panel, we feel like we do not want to have North Korea to reunite with North Korea just for money, if it's going to affect our sovereignty, if it's going to affect our best interest of peace, of humanitarian aid. Panel, we then come up here and tell you that we do not want to avoid a conflict of government. Panel, where we tell you that it is simply unrealistic that a dictatorship will simply step down and allow for a government to have both democratic parties and both dictatorship governments. But panel, let's say even if it was to work that these two governments would become one, panel, we still tell you that the best interests of North and South Korea are still not achieved, panel, because we then tell you that because of the different ideologies, they will never meet on a common ground. Panel, we then win this clash on the best interest of South Korea because we proved to you, panel, that firstly on peace, we achieve peace, panel, and because we then stop this reunification. As Dimple tells you that when we continue to push, and it's not under tells you that when we continue to push this idea of reunification, we are then going to force a war to break out because North Korea is going to feel like the only way they can have a united Korea is if they're in charge and if they have majority. What does that look like? It means that North Korea is then going to invade because they keep on being told about this idea of reunification, right? Now, panel, how do we win this clash on the best interest? Panel, we then come up here and prove to you that we are going to have more peace, we're going to have more humanitarian aid when we identified North Korea as an independent state. Why is that true? Dimple then tells you that in a world where we accept North Korea as an independent state, the border is going to become less hostile, and the best interest of South Korea, which is humanitarian aid, is going to become better because refugees are going to be able to cross without being shot down at the border. We believe that we're going to loosen tensions between North and South Korea when we allow North Korea to become an independent independent state. Now, the next clash in this debate was about which side makes more people happy, as we have seen in this debate. Now, opposition paints this idea that when a government keeps a promise of reunification, they make people happy. But pardon, we then come up here and tell you that when a government is continually pushing the idea that when we rejoin another country, our interests are going to be suppressed, we feel like that does not make the people happy. Pardon, we then come up here and tell you that when a government continue to push the idea that when we rejoin North Korea, our best interests are going to be stunted, we feel like people are not made happy. Panel, they fail to engage this panel when we try and ask them, panel, that on your side, how are the best interests of both parties improved? Panel, they only run the argument of how governments owe North Korean people this idea about how the government owes South Korean people this idea of reunification. Fine, panel, if that was even true, panel, we feel like even in the case that the government would owe the people of South Korea that obligation to be able to reunify with North Korea, we feel like that does still not satisfy the best interest of South Korea, which we have said from the first speaker to the third speaker now. Now, panel, the next clash in this debate, okay, may I please have 10 seconds to wrap up my speech? Okay, thank you. So panel, what do we then tell you in this debate? Panel, we then first tell you that the two would never have a stable government because of a significant difference in both ideologies, where one is the totalitarian dictatorship and democracy. We then tell you that conflict is most likely to happen and reunification is something which is most likely unrealistic. Panel, we then tell you that side opposition fails to meet or satisfy what this debate is about. And they fail to tell us, panel, how the best interests of South Korea and North Korea are met by reunification. And they simply dodge that by giving us this idea of how the government owes the South Korean people the obligation to reunify. With that in mind, we've never been proud to propose the motion.
I thank the speaker for their fine remarks. Before we proceed with further with the debate, just a heads up, try to keep your speeches within the speaking limit, that is 8 minutes with 15 seconds given to wrap up, beyond which the panel wouldn't note anything. So being said that, calling upon the third speaker from side opposition. If you're trying to say anything, you aren't audible.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Now you're audible.
Okay. Just let me set up my timer. Okay, panel, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's start with the basic burden of proof in this debate. Panel, we do not have to prove that unification will happen. We do not even have to show that it will be entirely beneficial, although we already did in the long term, and we have told you why we believe that it is good to pursue it. But the most importantly, our burden of proof is that we have to show that furthering the narrative of unification brings beneficial impacts and that changing the narrative will be negative. And this is what we have done in this debate, and this is the closest to the motion as we can get. Now, moving on to the interest of South Korea. We have told you about it in our arguments, but to make it entirely clear, it is a consistent policy that leads to more trust in our government. Because, panel, what we really need is political stability, especially when our neighboring country is a country that we view as entirely unstable and as a threat. Because, panel, let's notice that this willingness to cooperate from the citizens is crucial for good functioning of the country. Only when the citizens are willing to support the politics, to shape them, to participate in voting, because they believe that politics have sense, to engage in government's campaign, etc., the country is able to protect them and fulfill its principal duty. And we believe that when we have had this policy and this narrative for 50 years and people are so used to it, and there's a lot of older people who have this already internalized, and people learn at school about this narrative, people learn about their families who may need this narrative to reunite and to see people from North Korea, etc. They have this internalized, so it is much more likely that the stability will be gained on our side of the house, where people actually see that the government is not overnight just taking away this narrative and just suddenly changing its course without even trying. Because, panel, do not buy the childish characterization of diplomacy as a game of quick annexations and pure intents. Diplomacy is a game of gestures that should be either underestimated or overestimated, and it is something that we play long term, and it is something that requires our consistency. And secondly, we believe that the criteria of safety is very important in this debate. And panel, it's not about what will actually happen. It's also about what our citizens and we as a country believe that will happen. Because it's not that we have to believe that they will nuke us. It's that we believe that as a democratic country, we should not legitimize the authoritarian regime on site prop. That they will have an active narration that it is not an occupier, but suddenly we will have a narration that it's an independent country that can do whatever it wants to do. Notice that our people are severely against their system, not now, and that they perceive it as an expansion regime that has a paranoid and irrational leader. So when we say that we recognize this as a country and we validate their policies, then it's that even if they don't do anything, we as a country will feel less safe because we give them free will to conduct their action. And this is how the people will perceive it. Because right now, in the status quo, where we have this narrative of unification of Koreas, we have more political leverage. Firstly, because we as a country have, resources allocated especially for this to help with it. And we have, this ministry for unification. We have peace talks. So we have some kind of, we know that they won't attack us right away. It's not that they have to agree to it. They don't have to agree to it. They can not read any single letter of the letters that we sent to them. But the fact that we are sending those letters, the fact that we are sending those diplomats, and the fact that we are making those efforts are the most important. And panel, the other side is now talking about wasting the money on military, but it is quite an easy flip, and I will do it right now. On this side, notice that when we say that they are independent, it doesn't mean that they suddenly stop being a threat to us. We still will need to do military drafts. We'll still will need alliance from Western country. On site proposition, we need to make even more defense because we won't have unification peace talks, because they will see that now they can do whatever they want because they are an expensive regime. Hence, we will need to spend just as much, if not more, money for military defense when we lose our allies from democratic countries, because they will see that we gave up on our mission of unification and democracy, and because they will see that now the efforts are not needed and now we want to just leave North Korea alone. We believe that it is severely not good for our country to just say that we have a different narrative. And, okay, I can take the pill right now.
Do you think that people are going to trust in a government that promises them something that is quite unlikely?
Thank you so much. So now reality check. Have you seen any severe protests of people in South Korea saying that they do not want the unification? Because we have not while doing the research. We say that people are quite consistent on wanting to have this unification, or even if they do not want it, they do have nothing against it. They just simply, if there were widespread protests or people would, want to really not have this policy, it's very likely that the government would change it because the government knows that otherwise it would be, for example, voted out of the office because it is democratic. It does what the people want, and we see that the people actually want it or they have nothing against it, because this is a policy that is needed both for our people inside of our country and for our international policy that we are conducting with other countries. And panel, note that on the other side, at no point in this debate do they tell us how, actually mechanize how the North Korea would suddenly become less aggressive towards us. They never tell us why they would, just leave us alone, and why our citizens would believe that they will leave us alone. Because even if they want to do anything, this is purely about what people believe in. This is purely about the narrative. Another side doesn't tell us how this narrative of even recognizing it as an independent country would look like. We do not know how it will look like, so we believe that it is simply much more tangible on our side of the house. When you have a narrative that is unclear and shaky and you don't know what the impacts of it are going to be, and when you have a narrative that is already there in place for 50 years, that is conducted for some reasons for those 50 years, if it was completely not beneficial for the government, we believe that it would be abolished a long time ago, that people would revolt, that it would be changed. But it was not, and it was for some reason because the people that are conducting this are the experts, and they see the international and national humors of what people actually want. So we believe that this narrative is something much closer to us, and something that you can actually see, and we have proved this in our debate because we have characterized it from the first speech, and from the first speech we have been very consistent about what is actually important in this debate and what is it actually about. And now moving on, wait, let me see my notes. Okay, about the polarization, that people are not stupid and that they can see, that these policies are not really able to be conducted? Well, first of all, I already mentioned the protest, which we believe that would be a tangible proof that people do not have anything against it. But we also believe that when people are living in a democratic country and they believe in the mission of the democracy, and this is the system that they have voluntarily chosen to live in, and when they see that people from the North Korea really need it, and that some of them are close to them because they are, in close proximity to them culturally, either by family links or anything else, we do not believe that people will be polarized about the fact that we do not want to help them at all, because for some reason there are volunteers who, without any money from the government, are even helping North Korean escapes. There are people who are taking them into their own houses. There are people who are providing food for them, or who are providing culture and films and movies, etc., for them to be able to sustain this culture. So it's not like it has completely disappeared. It is the fact that people are even on their own making an effort to unify. So we believe that it is something that the people actually want, and that should be pursued as a narrative. Thank you.
Am I
On the
audible?
speaker. Yep, you're audible. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Sorry for interrupting you. That was not planned.
No issues. You can begin whenever you're ready.
Sure, I'll start my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Firstly, a few strategic comments on this debate. Panel, notice that Team Gov lost this debate at the point that we did not hear any analysis on why we'll have like one big North Korean regime, or how it will actually look like after the unification. I mean, what will be the political system? How much money we'll need to spend on that? We do not know any kind of scale, or basically we do not get any kind of proof on how it will happen, why it will happen, and it's a burden for their case to actually stand in this debate. But second, we believe that they made a huge squirrel of assuming the absolute worst case for side up. They literally said that, tomorrow we'll have like a big North Korean regime, and South Korea will literally become some kind of a weird state, and people will agree to that. We believe that our engagement gave you a really good reality check on why it is not the case, and their basically bottom line is simply very much out of this debate. But panel, another strategic point of this debate. Notice that it's not a debate about North Korea. This is in the interest. This is as South Korea, so we do not understand the part of their argumentation line that impacts people of South Korea, because it's much more explanations to why South Korea actually cares about that much. So we believe like they actually need to provide this to us. But moving on to the clashes in this debate. Firstly, the clash on consistency. Panel, note that at no point they actually rebut the key premise on why the people internalize this narrative that it was spread by the government for the 50 years so much. Why people actually want that and care about it, even if that's not possible. We believe that this is the rebuttal that they would need to provide in order to actually engage with our case, and they failed to do that at any point during this debate, which we believe that allows us to take this clash very easily. But moving on to the clash about money. Notice that they did not respond to any kind of analysis from us that, South Korea is still a rich country, we have money saved up because we have been taxing people for the last 50 years, and that South Korea probably is kind of prepared to do that if they have a special ministry prepared for that, and has been planning to do that for many years. We believe they cannot simply say, South Korea doesn't have the money when we gave a lot of analysis why South Korea probably has the money. But notice that our analysis from Yanek's DLO about the benefits of unification directly impacts their case, because it tells you why South Korea helped actually the monetary advantages from that also, which will definitely offset the cost that will be for sure needed. And note that with the case on the money about arms, we believe that it's super symmetric on both sides of the house. On both sides of the house, you probably for the next few years have a regime that is threatening to kill you, and you need to have like a huge army. We do not understand why it will be different, but on the long term, when reunification happens, then you may not spend that much money on arms. So actually, this is happening. I mean, this clash works on our side. The case on political structure. Note that they need to prove what will be the political structure, especially if they're claiming it will be another North Korea. It will definitely not be another dictatorship because nobody in their right mind will ever agree to that. Like, really, guys, South Korea does not want to be North Korea because they know how bad it is to live there. And moving on the clash about culture. Firstly, we believe that the unification will have to happen some kind of gradually. As we have pointed out, it won't be like, oh, tomorrow we are the same country. People will probably get used to that. Notice that they also not respond to that. They simply assume their best case that, oh, nobody will be able to actually get, there's no kind for people to get to know each other. But know that for the unification to happen, people will probably have to support in some kind of way in both countries. We believe that this also severely impacts the case. But at the end of the day, we even don't know the scale of the impact from their analysis here, because they did not provide us any kind of analysis on why it will harm South Korea, how it will affect people. But even if but notice that if we're debating on their best case and the unification is horrible, it will simply not happen. So all of their harms will not happen in this debate, but all of our impacts still stand. So we take this round. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for the final remarks. Proposition reply, speaker, whenever you're ready.
Okay, just to check again, am I audible?
Yep, you're audible, loud and clear.
All right, thank you very much. I will be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, 3 arguments from our side of the house that go completely unresponded to. The first is the idea about sovereignty. The idea that when you continue pursuing something that Kim Jong-un doesn't like, it is quite likely that you're going to raise the tensions that exist. Second, the idea about culture. We tell you that these countries were literally like ununified, if that's a word, 50 years ago. This means indoctrination has happened. This means a lot of change has happened. No response. They just tell us that these cultures are still going to be similar. Third, the economic burden that's going to be enacted on South Korea, the point at which this unification actually happens. Note, the only response we get to this is, oh, like we think like South Korea has a lot of money, so therefore they'll be able to survive. Quite frankly, economics tells us that an economy is very fragile. If you harm it in any way, it is quite likely that it's going to be harmed, it's going to crumble, people are going to lose trust in the government. The fourth is the level of polarization that's going to exist here, because you're going to have things such as the Korean narrative and what a Korean actually looks like due to the differences in beliefs. 4 arguments that literally go unresponded that are standing in this debate. Secondly, they refuse to engage with the context of this issue or of this debate, the idea of what North Korea looks like and the ability to engage in the first place. The idea that it is quite unlikely that the system of governance will be a democracy simply because a dictator is available. The only thing they tell us is, oh, we assume there's going to be a functional democracy. Thirdly, they only question us on strategy. They say we're only supposed to look at the pursuit here and what that means. Panel, note that in society, we normally assign value to things that are going to have value at the end. What this means is that if you debate, hey, this house would ban smoking motion, you wouldn't look at the banning process, you would look at the outcomes that are going to come with banning in the first place. They had to engage with that. Singular clash that exists within this debate, the idea about perception. What do they tell us? They say that, oh, like, this is a narrative that has always existed, therefore we should continue to push for it because you get a certain level of consistency. The first thing we tell you is that people in South Korea are not dumb. They know that Kim Jong-un doesn't want to continue with this. They know that like things such as unification tax are going to fall to the ground. Secondly, we think that we don't keep narratives simply because they exist, right? We keep narratives because they are true. We keep narratives because they're going to reach a certain level of utility. Their narrative doesn't do anything, the point at which they don't engage with our matter about this at large. But thirdly, and most crucially then, we told you here that that perception here is quite likely to be harmed on their side of the house when the government is continuously making amendments, giving them false promises, things that are unlikely to occur. Why then are we able to win this clash on our side of the house? The first is that we actually talk about the perception of South Korea here. The idea that you're going to be seen as a democracy that's literally babying a dictatorship and telling that dictatorship that, oh, like, come and join us. Here are gifts. We love you. Like, just come through. We think that harms the nation building of South Korea and the accurate democracy that it stands for as a result. But secondly, then, what you have to note is that if this unification happens and if these two individuals come together, you're likely going to have a dictatorship democracy type of government. We told you that this allows politicians to spread propaganda. This affects the perception of people. We told you that it is quite likely that people are still going to be polarized. This feeds into the perception on why it's likely to be harmful. Quite frankly, we win this debate on three matrices. Firstly, we engage with the pursuit and why it's particularly harmful. Secondly, in the best case, even if this pursuit occurs, we told you why it's something that we do not value. Thirdly, a huge chunk of our matter goes unresponded. Therefore, the ideas still stand. Quite frankly, winners can't unite with losers. And we're the losers here. Let South Korea relax. No unification on our side. Super proud.
I thank the speaker for their fine remarks and all the debaters in the room for such a great and engaging debate.